Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to episode 29 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This week's episode is unique. Earlier in the week, A.J. and I hosted a webinar on crisis logistics in the church. Given the rapidly evolving situation with the coronavirus around the world, we wanted to release the full, unedited audio of that webinar on our podcast to help your church prepare for a potential crisis. Put simply, if your church had to stop meeting for a few weeks, would you be ready to meet the spiritual and logistical needs that would arise? Additional resources such as a full set of notes and a downloadable crisis logistics PDF checklist can be accessed at malphursgroup.com/29, malphursgroup.com/29. Now, let's dive in. All right, everybody, welcome to our crisis logistics webinar. So glad so many of you guys are on here and registered. We kind of put this together last minute, AJ and I did, as we were talking last week, and just kind of realizing that this situation is rapidly evolving here with the coronavirus. And we thought, you know what, your church may never need a coronavirus plan, but it's a good time to be thinking about crisis logistics, whether or not the coronavirus ever ends up impacting you or not. So just briefly, the likelihood of the coronavirus spread, the COVID-19, is very high. That's, according to the CDC and the World Health Organization, it's just likely at this point. It may even, they're saying it may even have been spreading here for weeks at this point, and we just don't even know it. So in light of that, there's just lots we don't know. We don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know if we're going to be like Korea, where they're having to shut down church meetings for a while. We don't know if it's going to be like Japan, where they're closing schools for a month. We don't know how widespread infections are going to be. We just don't know. There's stuff we don't know. But being prepared is not the same as being a fearmonger. We are not interested at the Malphurs Group at trying to spread fear about this virus. That is not what we're about. We trust in the Lord. But being prepared is just being wise. Having a crisis plan is wise, not just for the coronavirus. Our thoughts and prayers right now are with the folks in Nashville. I don't know if we've got anybody from Middle Tennessee on today, but the terrible tragedy there last night with the tornado. And, there are churches that are in Nashville, I'm certain, given how bad that tornado was, that are going to be impacted by that tornado, right? Mm-hmm. So they might be missing a service or two. So having a crisis plan is good, regardless of whether we need it for coronavirus or not. So I'm glad that lots and lots of you are on here right now, thinking, "Hey, this is a good time to be thinking about this, whether it ends up being immediately relevant or not." Just a couple verses to encourage you in this. Proverbs 6:6-8. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. She prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. So it's Proverbs saying, hey, it's smart to make a plan while you don't need it. It's while you don't need the plan, that's the best time to be making the plan. Proverbs 13:16, in everything the prudent acts with knowledge, but a fool flaunts his folly. So when we're wise, we act out of knowledge and rather than our ignorance, and having a plan enables us to do that. So there are 3 levels of preparedness that we are going to talk through today in this webinar. The first one is we want to make sure that your church is ready to meet the spiritual needs of your church when there's a crisis. So if you have to shut down services for a week or 2 weeks or a month, how are you going to continue to care for your flock, the spiritual needs of your flock, when you can't gather together the way that you normally would? Secondly, we want you to think through some of the logistical needs. By no means is this webinar 100% comprehensive in all of the logistical details, but we want to hit some of the high points that we want to be sure you have thought through. And finally, maybe not something you would have expected on this one, how can you be ready to leverage this leadership opportunity? There is some good that can come out of this for you personally as a leader, and I'll explain what I mean by that when we get to that point. So, but just be thinking through that. Introduce myself. There are lots of you on here that have not ever joined us for a webinar before. Maybe you were referred by a friend or you saw it on Facebook. And so I just briefly want to introduce ourselves so that we're not strangers to you. My name is Scott Ball. I've got over 10 years of experience working on staff in churches, variety of settings, small rural church in Southwest Virginia doing student ministry, worked in a really large church for a while doing student ministry, helped plant a church. I grew from just the two of us that planted it to 800 people in 4 years. It grew really quickly, learned a lot of good things, bad things, made a lot of mistakes along the way, and bring all of that experience into my work with the Malfers Group, and with the Malfers Group going into my 5th year now, partnering with churches from coast to coast. So actually this past weekend, I was in Cape Carteret, North Carolina, so right on the Atlantic coast, and then on Friday I'm flying out to Los Angeles, so literally coast to coast in a week. My master's is from Gordon Conwell. Focus of my studies in leadership and church planting, and I'm married. That's my wife in the picture, Allison, and we've got 2 kids, Liam, who's 7, my daughter Nora just turned 5, and AJ. Always make this joke every time I show this picture. Doesn't get old. Best dad ever.
Congratulations. I just love congratulating you constantly on that award as well.
Yep. You know what? I could change the picture. There are better pictures of our family, but in no other pictures am I holding that sign. So
it's the most narcissistic one you could find. So you're going to run with it.
100%. Yep. You know it. AJ's not a stranger. He's not like the one person tuning into this that also got to be on camera. He's
here for a reason. That guy, like a Penn and Teller act going on here or something.
Yeah. That's right. AJ, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is AJ. So I'm the president and one of the lead guides here at the Malfers Group, working with churches. Come out of a lot of small business experience, and a leader in my church, and had with the privilege of building leaders in our church. So I love what we get to do. And as Scott said, we get to travel all over the country and the world, as a matter of fact, working with churches doing this stuff. I didn't put the picture of me with the first runner-up dad award, but I am also proud of only being one out of best. So, I think that's okay.
Just keep that, AJ.
I'm coming after you next year.
That's right. I just want to let you guys know before we continue moving forward, there is chat and then there's Q&A. So if you have just a general comment, feel free to make that in the chat. If you have a question, please put that in the Q&A, and that will help us be able to answer those questions as we go along. As I mentioned, we've got these 3 levels of preparedness, and AJ, let's maybe just take a couple of questions after each section. That way we don't get too far away from each section as we're answering those questions.
Sounds good.
All right. So let's dive into this first level of preparedness, which is to be ready to meet the spiritual needs of your church. So Hebrews 10:25 says, "Do not neglect meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." And so it's really important that, if we value being a worshiping people who study the scripture, people who have authentic Christian community with one another, we can't let a virus or a tornado or any sort of disaster keep us from meeting together. So how can we do this in a way that is effective? So the first question is, how can we be prepared to meet if we cannot gather? This is not a difficult question to answer in 2020, whereas 1980, this would have been difficult, right? But I want to give you 3 options. All of them are technology driven, but there are 3 different ways you could go about this. The first one is you could pre-record 4 sermons. So if you're not particularly tech savvy as a pastor, you managed to get onto Zoom today. So kudos to you. If you're listening to this replay later and you're like, I never would have been able to figure out how to make my way onto Zoom for a webinar, then this might be a good option for you. Write 4 sermons and go ahead and pre-record them. Have them in the can. Set up a camera. Hopefully you have that ability at your church, or can get that ability at your church, or at least have the audio recorded of it or something. Pre-record those 4 sermons. And this is the best option for the pastor or the preacher that has very low technical skill. This empowers the preacher's, his or her team to do the heavy lifting when it comes to the technology side of it. So if you've got the pre-recording done, at that point you can pass it off to the people who do know how to do tech things at your church and let them edit it and put slides in and all that stuff. And that way it's just ready to go. And then the best way then is to just release that pre-recorded message online using whatever existing methods you use to post things. Or if you've got a Facebook page, which 99% of churches do at this point, you can use the watch party function on Facebook. So this is a great option to use if you have, it's not live necessarily. You can load up a video into a watch party, a pre-recorded video into a watch party, and use that as like a live event, even though the video itself is pre-recorded. Something else to let your church members know, that you do not have to have a Facebook account to access a public Facebook page. So sometimes people get nervous and go, well, I don't want to, stream this thing on Facebook because not everybody in our church has a Facebook account. That's okay. People can actually still access your Facebook page even if they don't have an account. I don't know if you knew that or not. And so everybody in your church, so long as they have the link to your Facebook page, can access that even if they don't have a Facebook account. And they can, stream or watch whatever you have going on that page. So option number one is to pre-record the sermons and then do like a watch party on Facebook during your service time. The option number two is the one that you probably assumed I was going to say first. Just use Facebook Live, right? This puts the highest pressure on the pastor or the preacher, though, to set up. It's the easiest option in that, you can just set your computer down, hit go live, and go. But, there's a lot that can go wrong with live. And if you're a kind of a person, you're watching this right now and you're thinking, I don't feel confident that, the video is going to look very good, that the audio is going to sound very good, that the lighting is going to be right, that I can manage to press all the buttons the right way. This might not be your personal best option. You might want to go with that pre-recorded option, or what I'll talk about in option number 3. But here's how to prepare for this. You want to go ahead and set up a test event you can set up like a private event within your Facebook page that your people aren't invited to. And then practice going live. Test and make sure that you know how to get the sound right, that you can get the lighting right, that you get the camera ready. Go through that once or twice and that whole process of going live so that you know that you can do it and feel confident that you can do that. The other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to designate a host for that event besides you, whoever is preaching or presenting. And this is the person that's going to moderate and engage in the comments. So this is the person who is kind of handling the pastoral part of the worship service. Oh, hey, Jenny, so glad that you could join us online today. They're the ones that, when we're going to talk a little bit about giving, online giving, this is the person who's going to link that. Even when we do these webinars, AJ's handling comments and Q&A right now while I'm talking. And in a couple of minutes when AJ's talking, I'm going to be handling that. You always want to have someone whose job it is to moderate or host while someone else is speaking. So if you're going to do the Facebook Live option, be sure you designate a host who's going to be running that side of things.
And that person can be remote, completely in a separate.
Right. You don't have to be in the same room.
So, yep.
100%. Yeah. AJ and I are like 1,000 miles away from each other right now. So, all right. Option number 3 is Facebook Live or stream from your church. The deal with coronavirus in particular is that we're trying to avoid community spread. If you're dealing with a natural disaster, your church might be out of commission, and that's why you're not meeting. But if it's the coronavirus, we're just trying to avoid getting large groups of people together. There is no reason why, your worship leader, you as the preacher or pastor, and a couple of tech people can't be there to run a service, just not have the people there. This is a really great option. So this middle option allows the pastor to leverage the full technical capabilities of the team to ensure that all those technical issues are addressed. And an added benefit is this has sort of a normal appearance for churchgoers. They might not be physically there, but they are watching something that they are used to seeing. And that can bring a sense of normalcy in a crisis situation. Like, okay, the church is still there. The pastor is still up on the stage I'm used to seeing and all of that. So again, in a natural disaster, this won't work. But if you take proper precautions, this is a good option for a coronavirus closure. Now, I think of all of these options, AJ, I think this is my favorite. I like the idea of just run the service from the church.
Yeah.
And just don't have people there. Have them watch from home.
Yeah, and even if you don't normally live stream, you could, kind of do a little blended thing of this. You could Facebook Live from the church. If you have one tech person there with you to even, put a cell phone on a tripod in front of you, just so you have your normal backdrop. And so you could do, these aren't all exclusive. You could kind of blend these ideas.
That's right. And on this same note, if you're thinking, man, I really love that option, but we're not prepared for streaming at our church, now's a great time to start doing that. So we are not experts in how to set up, what are all the best cameras and tools for that, but we can connect you with people who are better at that than we would be. And I would think for an investment of $1,000, a couple $1,000, you could probably get a decent setup at your church for streaming. Obviously, it can get very expensive if you go to super deluxe options, but for a pretty simple streaming setup with the audio and the video coming through, leveraging your sound system and all that, you're looking at I don't even want to say, AJ, but probably a couple $1,000 to invest in that.
Yeah, relatively minimal, for 2020. And in fact, Adam just mentioned here in the chat, because I was trying to think of these really easy plug and play cameras, and Mevo, I think it's pronounced Mevo, MEVO, is a real good option. And I worked with a church that's what they do every Sunday. They've got these Mevo cameras, and those work really well. And my friend Garen just mentioned as well, and I forgot you did this, Garen, but they had a snowstorm a year ago up in the Seattle area where he is, and he Facebook lived on Sunday morning from home, from his living room. And so, yeah, these are things that definitely, this is more than a coronavirus solution. Anytime that you're not going to be able to meet, then have these things in your tool bag.
Right. I would recommend, though, in a coronavirus situation, you could have a more advanced setup. Snowstorm, it's like it happened overnight. You're putting something together. Facebook Live from your living room is a great option. But this you can prepare for. And if you have this, the technical setup there, stream from your church. Like it just gives normalcy there. And again, also have someone who's set up as sort of the moderator or host who, even if you're streaming from the church, have someone who's monitoring the comments and that sort of thing. All right. The second question when it comes to meeting the spiritual needs is how can you meet the pastoral care needs? And I want to address specifically in the coronavirus type situation. When it comes to a more natural disaster, it's going to be more of the kinds of things that you are used to doing already. But in a particular situation where it's probably not a good idea for you to be physically in contact with so many people. We want to talk about how can you still meet pastoral care needs that way. The first kind of fundamental question is, are you the pastor, the church's primary caregiver?
Yeah.
Are you the one who is driving all of that pastoral care? Does it all fall on your shoulders?
Yeah, that's a kind of a bigger question that we would be talking about this like in a strategic planning process as well. Having your church prepared for growth, hopefully, that's something that you're looking forward to in your church, that, as a healthy church, you'd be a growing church, but being a sole primary caregiver can stunt your growth and really, that can cause problems going forward. So if that's you today, we totally get it. You're definitely not alone, but that now is certainly the time to be thinking about that because it's more than just the day-to-day or the week-to-week grind that you being the primary pastoral caregiver of your church could be preventing you from using your time in other capacities that could help, in a greater way. But in a crisis time, then you might really need somebody else to be able to help carry that load. And then this, right? Are you a part? Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I was going to say we'll give a couple extra thoughts on that here in just a minute. But yeah, are you part of the vulnerable population is a critical question. If you're over age 60 or have had lung health problems in the past, or have had other kinds of diseases that make you more, vulnerable to this disease, you should not put yourself in a position where you might compromise your own health. It's just, I don't want to say it's not worth it. I mean, of course, to some extent, ministry, we're all pouring ourselves out, right? Like Paul said, as drink offerings. But don't needlessly put yourself in a position where you might get yourself sick. And so if you're part of that vulnerable population, it's especially important that you think through some of these issues.
Yeah, right.
So again, technology is your friend here. So for personal contact, use FaceTime, use Skype. People want to have a conversation, set up ways for those things to happen. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, face-to-face. Email is good. Text messaging is good. Facebook messages are good. The main key thing here, I think, AJ, is letting people know in advance. Listen, if we're in a crisis situation and it's a health risk, understand that I may not be able to meet with you in person.
Yeah.
And so and let people know in advance, here are the avenues in which we will connect with you if you're in crisis. Mm-hmm. Here's my, set up a Zoom account like this. You could do it that way, or here's how we're going to do this through Facebook has a video messaging feature if you don't want to give people your personal phone number or whatever. Just pick a way in which you want to communicate with folks and let them know in advance, this is how we're going to primarily communicate. And then that way the expectation is set up front.
And that's, setting expectations is kind of the key thing. And even not only in a crisis situation, but ongoing. So that's typically that change that needs to get made in churches, especially smaller churches where the pastor is the primary caregiver. It's that shift of expectation that you need to begin moving towards so that you can, broaden your team of caregivers, and everybody does not demand, your time personally. This might be just a good opportunity to do that in your church, regardless of whether anything happens that would keep the church from meeting. Maybe this would just be a good catalyst for you to begin thinking through that and start putting together other people that could also be effective caregivers.
Right, which is the next point here. Begin preparing others to help carry the load. Start thinking strategically through how could we divide this up. So some churches will take their team. If you've got elders or deacons, you might divide the congregation up into subgroups, and each subgroup has its own shepherd over that. You could do that by ministry area or department. You could do that geographically. There's any number of ways that you could divide it up. But another way, if you have small groups or life groups or even Sunday school classes, mm-hmm. Make the primary pastoral caregiver be whoever is in charge of that class. And then above and beyond that, maybe split up the life groups or small groups or whatever according to elders. So maybe like you have an elder who shepherds these 4 life groups. And so there's a level up. You really want to make it so if the pastor is the one who's having to come see you, it's not good news for you. That means you're in a serious situation.
Yeah.
We need to start, and it isn't that you're too busy or you're too important to have a personal connection with everybody. It's that people need to stop feeling like your prayers count double in the kingdom, versus an elder's prayers or a deacon's prayers or mm-hmm. or their neighbor's prayers, right? Your prayers count just as much as someone else's. And it is not so much about elevating yourself as it is about elevating the people around you to your same sort of spiritual level, and going, their prayers count just as much as mine do.
Yeah.
So as we've said here, then if you don't have deacons or elders, use board members, Sunday school teachers, or others can be drafted. Make your youth pastor care for more than just the kids, right? Like have them care for parents. And there are all kinds of people in your church that you can draft to be a part of your pastoral care plan, particularly in a crisis. And again, as we've said a bunch, this is a good idea anyway. This should be happening regardless. But if you were looking for a reason to start implementing a broader base of pastoral care, now is a good reason. Because, if 30% of the people in your church contract a virus, you probably can't visit them all.
Right.
Nor should you.
Yep. And you probably have existing people that you can leverage to do this. You just haven't taken advantage of that yet, and really put them into service in a capacity that, we believe biblically they should be helping fulfill anyway. So right. This should be a good opportunity for you to do that.
All right, AJ, let's answer some questions here. So this is the first part here. So be sure you have a plan in place for how you can meet virtually if you can't meet in person, and then create a plan for who is going to help care for the pastoral care needs. Set the expectations up front of here's how we're going to meet with you if we can't physically come see you. AJ, you made a good point. Your son actually had been sick earlier this year, and there was a period of time where he couldn't even have had visitors, and that might be the case. If you've got folks in your church that get this, they may not even be, if they are in the hospital, they might not be able to accept visitors. So this might not be just about your willingness to see them in person. It might be you might not be allowed. So you want to have thought through that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's kind of like what the current coronavirus thing. Isolation is kind of the key to helping it not spread. So all of these technology things that we have just talked about, can help isolate and stop the spread of something like that to the greatest degree. We'd have one question kind of on our last section here, Scott, though, about what we would suggest to do with like medical professionals in our church.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that, Scott. I hadn't really thought about that, but medical professionals in a greater crisis, will probably already be called up into maybe an even higher level of service than they're used to already. So adding a specific additional request of them through the church may or may not work, depending on kind of what their capacity is and what, level of medical care that they're used to giving already. I don't know that we want to necessarily try to have, a church-based medical team that's moving around or not. But those folks might be a good resource, though, to at least maybe answer questions and help people understand maybe what a current situation is.
Yeah, I think there would be a couple of options to connect with your medical professionals. One is, to leverage them as an asset. So, if they can communicate things in a particular way and to the rest of the congregation, that would be good. Another thing is, they might have to be working extra hours.
Yeah.
They might be, on call more or whatever. And so you probably already have care plans in place for people who are sick through, preparing food and that kind of thing. But maybe add those people to your list. Think through how can we prepare meals for medical providers in our church so that when they come home, they're not, I've worked 2 shifts in a row and I'm exhausted, and now I also have to get food together for my family. So start thinking through how can you care for their soul and how can you care for their family in a way that eases tensions for them.
Yeah, that's a great thought. That's exactly what Brad just kind of tagged on there as well, as helping them care for their families. So while, church not meeting might mean that a lot of people have less to do, it might mean that some of you people have a whole lot more to do. So
that's right. Yes. So Kelly had asked about, should we leverage groups to help care? Yeah, absolutely we should. You can even have your groups continue to meet online. They can continue to meet online beyond just having your Sunday services online. You could have small groups meet together through Zoom, or group FaceTime chats or that kind of thing. Yeah. If you don't have right now this came to mind, AJ. If you only have a Facebook page right now and not also a Facebook group, maybe go ahead and create a Facebook group as well. People are more likely in a Facebook group to share prayer requests or needs or whatever, and you might want to have a group where people would, that's closed to the public, but where people can express their needs and communicate with one another that way.
Yeah, that is a good option. If you don't understand what that means, ask any 17-year-old in your church, and they'll probably be able to help you.
Hey, real quick note before we move on to part 2. Several of you have asked if the PowerPoint is going to be available. Yes, we'll send PowerPoint to you, and then we're also going to take all of these tips and turn them into a crisis preparation checklist. We'll send that to you with the replay probably tomorrow morning. All of that will get to you to your email. So
yeah, this will be available on YouTube this week.
All right, AJ.
All right, talk a little bit now about financial prep. So, are my controls working here, Scott?
I think so.
There we go. Yeah, preparing for alternate giving first is what we want to talk about. So, a lot of churches just haven't moved to that point yet of having anything besides maybe the envelopes that are going on, or check giving happening. And this is a great time to start looking at what these alternatives are. There's some other, again,
hold on. I want to interrupt you for a second. I know some people right now are probably their jaws on the floor and going, there's not a church in the world that has not moved to online giving. And we just want to say there are actually lots more than you'd think. So don't ignore this.
Absolutely. I know you do too, Scott. Frequently visit churches that this is not an option. But there's not really, I think, a good reason to not do it. It's certainly not a financial reason to not do it. I think this is only upside because, as time goes on, decades pass, and technology changes, and just culturally, we just do a lot with these silly things now in our hands, and financial is just another one of those. So we don't need to dwell on that. If you think people won't use it, you're probably wrong. You probably will find that people will begin to use that. So look closely at just what your options are for that. Givingfees.com has a really good comparison chart that you can compare a lot of these service providers, because there's varying fees and the way they work and how quickly funds are available and those kinds of things to look at. So that is just a really great option. But having, something besides your traditional envelope system, or somebody putting a check into an offering plate, is going to be necessary. If you can't meet 1 week, 3 weeks, a month, then, the bills are continuing to be due, and that income is going to be necessary. So, speak to the congregation ahead of time, in that regard as well, and just make sure that that's clear. if it looks like, hey, we're going to go ahead and heed the CDC's warning, and starting next week, we are not going to be meeting together, then, just, put this out. This is factual and necessary for the church to understand and to be able to continue to support the ministry. An online help giving station. So this is something that you could set up, even sometime soon. Have somebody, hopefully you've got maybe a welcome center in your lobby somewhere, or some way that you connect with guests or be able to provide information to people. But just helping people, once you have some kind of an online giving set up, or maybe you already do, a way for them to get their questions answered, so that they can, just show how easy it is, maybe be able to walk them through setting up an account even there while they're at your station in the church. But this can help people to be a little bit more comfortable with it, and just be prepared to do it. And the earlier that you begin this, then the more time you have to answer questions and help people work out bugs and kinks. And so shouldn't mention bugs with coronavirus.
That's true. Well, listen, the reality is, if you've got a church with an older population, right, they're the ones that they're going to be resistant to online giving, or nervous about it, or whatever. And this is for them. You say, all right, we've got people who will help you get this set up. They're not going to see how much you're going to give. They're not going to look at your account number, but they'll walk you through the process for getting this set up. And we're not even telling you need to use the online giving. We just want to help you get it set up so that if the church can't meet, you already have an account set up, and you're ready to give that way, in the event that we can't meet for 3 weeks or something like that. So that's just helpful to do.
Yeah. Once you have that, make sure that that is also obvious on your website. Your website may become an even more important communication tool for you than you might be using it as now, but making that easy then for people, maybe it won't be an app or maybe you'll have multiple methods for doing this, but having a giving link on your website that is easy for your people to find and use would also be something that you're going to want to prepare for ahead of time. So, be prepared to link to giving options during live streams and mention that. So this is another little technical nuance here that maybe some of you are already overwhelmed with the thought of doing a Facebook Live sermon, but a lot of these tools will have a way that you can share links and even have something more integrated into that live stream experience that would allow people to maybe just in your normal flow of service even. You could have your time to receive your tithes and offerings, and then online you can have that same experience happening. So make sure that you've got that set up as well so that you can make sure that that's just understood, especially in a time of crisis. So also you need to consider your current accountability policies. So kind of moving away from giving and thinking more about that's okay. More about how bills get paid in the church. So this is really something that needs to be thought through. Hopefully you do have some good accountability policies in place that require multiple eyes and hands on moving funds around and writing checks and paying bills. But now's the time to think through those things, because sometimes what is a really good policy to have in place might become very restrictive in a time of crisis in which people are not physically getting together in a room to do something or to make decisions and talk through things. And so review your policies to make sure that you are going to be able to do things in a little bit more remote fashion than what you're used to doing now. And that might even require maybe a little bit of temporary authorization for groups to be able to do what they need to do. And in some even, more restrictive cases with churches that are very congregationally driven, if you need to bring something like this before the church, then I would do that soon. Write up the language that you need that says in the event of a crisis, these are some temporary policies that would be authorized to be in place so that we can manage the operations of the church if we can't be together. So definitely think through that and look at your written policy and see what would be required for that. One of those, like I said, would be, whatever team handles a lot of finance things. In some, more restrictive bylaws or church constitutions requires actually a physical meeting between parties. A lot of groups and organizations require this. I used to be in local government, and there's certain policies that don't allow virtual meetings. So if you need to be able to pre-authorize virtual meetings on telephone or a video conference such as this, then
or even to be able to vote via email.
Right. Yes. Some other alternate voting method if you need that. So that, and again, this might only be, a separate clause now that allows, in the event of an emergency or crisis situation, that you have some alternate methods of being able to manage things that have more of an official capacity to them. So someone might need to bring some checks home to be signed. Okay. So, here's one of these very, very physical things. So, and a lot of churches are still just writing checks. You can't pay everything online. And so, but even that, maybe people are cringing right now. Oh my gosh, we cannot have blank checks leave the church. And I'm not saying that's a great practice to have going on all the time.
It's for sure not a good idea.
But if you're not going to be there for 2 weeks and there are still, creditors out there that are going to be expecting to be receiving their money, you might have to have somebody bring some checks home. Maybe you could pre-fill those out so that they just need to be mailed on a certain day or something like that by somebody. And, I think, is it my next slide? Yeah. Maybe you also require 2 signatures, either on all checks or over a certain dollar amount. So again, these are things, I'm not telling you the best way to handle that. But if you're trying to have 2 people that don't already live in the same household, and they shouldn't be both signers on the account anyway. If you don't want the people getting together, then you might have to have one signature on a check already. And again, not an ideal situation, but we're not talking about an ideal situation here. We're talking about a crisis situation. So, and this is just a temporary preparedness that you can have so that you can best follow your existing policies, but still make sure the business is taken care of and that things are going to get done.
On that same note, maybe it's time to look at some online check writing possibilities. I mean, there's ways to write checks online.
There is a lot of technology that you could utilize that if these are kind of ringing with you, like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of stuff that we would have to think through, then yeah, there's definitely a lot of alternatives out there. Look ahead to some uncommon financial needs as well. Will there be any large money transfers that are going to be needed maybe in the next month or so? A lot of expenses in the church are like annual things, maybe some big renewal of something or a large insurance payment or just any number of things, a large expense for an upcoming mission trip. There's some big ticket items that come up only, quarterly or once a year. So if that's normally a case in which you have more of a holding account or a savings that you would have to do a transfer, then make sure that you're going to be able to do that remotely and move money around. This might be another one of those pre-authorization situations that you'll have a list that you're operating from. We know we're going to need to move $8,500 from, saving or mission fund over to checking. So just look ahead and, don't be flying by the seat of your pants on the financial needs of the church.
Yeah.
Emergency funds are something else. So a lot of you have a rainy day fund. We hope you do. We recommend several months, depending on what your budget size is, the size of your church. The larger your budget is, the more rainy day fund you should have. But even smaller churches, if you can get yourself up to 3 months of savings to be able to cover 3 months of expenses that you can cover, then we definitely recommend that from a financial stewardship perspective. But sometimes those are more restricted funds as well, though. And so if you are more of, on a sort of hand to mouth financial position in your church, and if, you don't really, if you're not at 90% of your giving for that week, things get pretty tight, then you definitely need to make sure you have whatever you need in place to be able to dip into that rainy day fund so that you can keep things going until things get back to normal. So definitely keep that in mind if that's a very restricted fund.
You may also look at just going ahead and transferring, and if okay, we're going to have 3 weeks that we're, for the next 3 weeks we're not going to be meeting. You don't know what those online giving numbers are going to be, so you might, just go ahead and transfer certain funds on the front end. If you don't carry enough cash in your regular checking to cover those expenses, and that way they're going to be covered. We have the next month's worth of expenses already in the checking account, and then once the crisis is over, do an evaluation and figure out how much you need to transfer back into savings. But you don't want to be caught in a situation where a bill is due and you don't have the funds in there, and now you're having to do an emergency transfer. Just have thought through that in advance. Go ahead, if we can't meet for a month, transfer a month's worth of expenses in there. And if you don't spend it all that, great. Fantastic. You got enough in the online giving. Amazing. And then when the crisis is over, move it back into savings. But that way you're already ready.
Great point. So, and I've sort of already mentioned this, but just establish some temporary accountability policies. So, and again, you could leverage a little bit of technology here. If you did have to operate under that 2-signature check situation in which maybe one person has some checks with them that have been pre-signed by somebody else, then you could, take pictures of that. You could have photographic evidence of, the amount that check was written to. Or just be able to follow any other sort of virtual timeline of money being moved around. Anything that you can do to just be able to add a little bit of comfort, especially to the people that will be really cringing on these things, being out of the ordinary, and maybe a little less what you would feel like is secure. just, allow some things that would be able to deal with the situation and still, have the greatest amount of trust in people and be able to just follow that paper trail whenever you have it back to normal.
That's right. You sign, a check 1100 through a check 1120 have been pre-signed, one signature. Every time a check gets written, a picture of that check is taken and submitted to the finance team or elder board or whatever. And then every check is accounted for. And when the crisis is over, the checks come back and any unused checks are noted. So that way, that every check that got sent out, how much it was for and all of that. So it's not like it can't be accountable, even if it's a kind of a riskier crisis type situation.
Yeah. Yes, and you're certainly going to run into people. You may be this person that you're just saying, "Well, we just can't do that. That's not how we do it, or we're not allowed to do it that way." And we're just here saying, write up a temporary policy that says, for this situation or this time being, we are going to be allowed to do it this way. So you just don't have to be, completely rigid on everything. The most important thing is to maintain as much normalcy as possible across everybody that serves in the church and participates in your ministry, and just support each other so that you can get through this as easily as possible. All right, let's talk a little bit about facilities prep now. Some things that you can do with your building and things inside it. So first, asking, do you have a security system? A lot of churches do not, and that's surprising to me sometimes as well. And I know that's a financial thing because those can be expensive. But there are a lot of off-the-shelf plug-and-play things that you could leverage for this. Companies like Ring or Simply Safe. And even a lot of these products are even available now off the shelf in your office supply stores, Walmart. So you can literally go grab a thing in a box, plug it in, connect it to like your Wi-Fi. I hope you've got some internet at your church, and be able to set up cameras at least maybe by your main doors in your lobby area, or in areas maybe that have some higher valuable items that at least for the time being, with a few $100s, you can have at least a very basic security system in place that would alert you if there's something going on. You don't have to have something that's monitored by police. A lot of these options do that. You can pay a monthly fee, but others can simply notify you on an app or online somewhere. And you could literally be able to look at a view from the camera and then be able to, call 911 yourself if it appears that somebody is actually tampering with your facilities. But these are great options if you don't have a security system. Then
I'll just say, AJ, I worked at a church where I bought a Simply Safe system for our church offices. Our offices were separate from the main building. And I unpacked that thing and set it up within an hour. It was very, very easy to set up. We're not a sponsor. Simply Safe is not a sponsor, but it was very easy to set up, and I think it was month to month on the contract. So you can try it out and pay for that service. It was definitely worth it. And it was a nice peace of mind to know that if something were to happen, the police were going to be called. And so, yeah, I pick any system you want, but I had a really good experience with Simply Safe just for what it's worth. It was extremely easy to set up, and it was really affordable.
Yeah, that's good. That's what I've heard too. But hey, get a fake security sign. Even if you don't have a real one, you can buy these at Home Depot or your favorite quote unquote big box home improvement store.
If you don't have any moral quandaries with saying this is video, monitored by video surveillance when you're lying about it.
Is that yeah. But you know what? Hey, you can grab these things and put them in, and maybe it would be enough of a deterrent for somebody just to think twice. So. Remove valuables, okay? This is another thing. If you're going to be gone for several weeks, it's probably going to become obvious that nobody's been at the church for a while. Mm-hmm. And so this might be, and again, don't cringe like, oh my gosh, we can't have people taking home expensive assets. But take your laptop, of course, with you. But even desktop computers, it doesn't take much. Shut them down, unplug them. You could leave the monitors there, take the towers, create backups of things so that you've got your data protected. But even some easily removable audio video equipment. I mean, grab those cameras off of the tripods if you have them, or other things that just are of high value that looters might be looking to take advantage of, and would know that a church would probably have these things. Churches in schools get broken into all the time, and the things that get stolen are computers or musical instruments. These kinds of things that are they're of high value and that are easy to move. Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yep. So take that stuff out if you can, especially if you know you're gone for a few weeks. It will be worth the time to do that. You might still be dealing with broken glass, but at least the loss will be minimized on what they're actually able to get out of your building. You're not dealing with as much of a delay on insurance and all these things. You can just get the door fixed and bring your stuff back.
Lock stuff up too. You might not necessarily even have to take stuff home, but someone who is breaking in, they're going to look for, it's a smash and grab, right? It's going to be, what are the things they can easily grab? So just, if you can lock some things up, especially if you combine this with a security system, again, not promoting Simply Safe, but that sucker is loud. Like, as soon as you break in, that alarm is insanely loud. And so someone would probably only try to steal something they could just find very quickly. They're not going to go into a closet that's locked and try to break that thing open. They're going to see what they can see, what they can find. If it's attached to a ceiling, you don't have to take your projectors down. It's that stuff that's just loose and available. I fully expect if the local government says, hey, churches shouldn't meet for the next 3 weeks, that is an open invitation to people with sticky fingers, to try and just test doors on churches to see if this door is open. So just be smart.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of you are in, challenging areas of your town. I spoke with a pastor last week that they've been broken into dozens of times. And that's when they're showing up there every day for work that, they're getting broken into. So it definitely there will be crimes of opportunity happening. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
We already talked about this, taking home expensive items. And so also just think through what you might be doing, as far as what if you were going on vacation at home, what are some of the things that you would do to prepare your home for you not to be there for a little while? So there's no sense in continuing to heat water in the church. Especially we're talking already about finance maybe in a decline during this time. So why be paying to heat water when you're not there? These are also, prone to failure as well. So I've certainly dealt with situations in which water heaters ended up failing, and turning off water is another thing. If you can, especially on the water heaters, don't turn the water off without turning the power off. If you have electric water heaters or gas, turn off your burners. But especially on electric ones, if you turn the water off, and you don't turn the power off, then you're heating up water that is going to be evaporating out of that tank, and then your burners are going to be exposed. I know this from experience, and then your burners will burn out. So that's AJ's tool tip for the day here as well. AC and heat. So hopefully you've got programmable thermostats, but change those temperatures. It doesn't, you don't need a comfortable 72 degrees in there every day if there's nobody in there. So another energy saving tip here for you. And so if there's other ways that you can turn off water though, kill some electrical circuits, if the water's turned off, then, any burst pipes or anything else that could fail and cause any flooding situations in which, you're not there to find it the next morning, then we certainly don't want, weeks worth of water causing more damage than anything else that you will have faced during that time period. So definitely, work with your maintenance personnel to figure out what you can do to minimize any kind of secondary crisis that could come up from you not being there.
That's right. All right, let's answer any questions.
Takes us up to, we did have, somebody talk about, at this point, from a global perspective, we're not certainly in a panic position at this point, but trying to decide when to close. I don't know. My 2 cents on that is not before a CDC recommendation, or maybe a local recommendation. If you're in a hot spot, if your city becomes maybe a hot spot, and your town suggests that groups not meet. I don't think before that. I don't think church leaders ought to say, hey, preemptively, we're just not going to meet. I don't know. I think I would wait for it to be a little bit more necessary before I would do that, because you might have some people that are kind of like, I can't believe you're doing that. It's not that bad. And end up with some unnecessary groaners, giving you a hard time. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Scott? When to close?
I agree. I would not, if they say churches should close, would be one reason. The other is if schools are closed, if they close the schools, because a locality might feel uncomfortable asking churches not to close. They might be like, we don't want to separation of church and state. We don't want to ask churches to close. So that may never come. But if they're closing schools because of the virus, then you might consider suspending services.
Yeah.
So those would be the two options. I got to be honest. When flu was really bad several weeks ago here in our area, our church didn't close, but we chose to stay home because there was a very severe peak of flu cases, and we were like, I'm not putting my kids in children's ministry with 10 other kids who might have the flu. So.
Well, that's a great point, and especially going back, to our online giving and even online, streaming of services. You might have some people who are just going to voluntarily put themselves in some level of isolation.
That's right. Quarantine
long
themselves
ahead of any recommendations by any governing authorities. So
Right.
You might just find a drop off again, especially if you're in a part of the country already that has had some cases. Then you might see the chairs or pews are thinning out a bit. So some of these things might be really useful for you, even if you're not actually officially not meeting.
Right. Finally, very briefly, I just want to touch on maybe something you didn't expect, which is to be ready to leverage this as a leadership opportunity for yourself. A campus closure is an opportunity for personal leadership growth, in my opinion. Here's the question. If 25% of your responsibilities were on hold for 2 weeks, because you couldn't be at the office, you couldn't be at the church, you couldn't be out and about doing things. Here's the question. What 3 things in your organization or your leadership would you work on? Take this time. Like if you can't meet for a couple of weeks, you're going to be busy in other ways. You got to figure out the live stream. You've got to, be caring for people who are getting sick. But in other senses, there are things that you can't do because you're not going to be at the office. So if you thought about maybe 25% of your responsibilities were on hold, rather than just being like, sweet, I get to work from home for the next 2 weeks and sit back and watch the Today Show every morning. Like what could you work on in yourself or your organization that you wouldn't necessarily normally have the opportunity to work on? So I just want to throw out some things for you to consider. First, strategic planning. We're big, obviously, proponents of that. But thinking through the future and planning for the future. Your sermon calendar. I'm a major proponent of planning your sermons further out than just what is the next series. I personally feel like you should sermon plan for an entire year. That's kind of my recommendation. And then quarterly, you would look at more detailed plans, but sort of map the sermon calendar out for a year, and then quarterly be looking at the more specific details. So this would be a great opportunity to work on that if you haven't in a while and you've gotten behind on that. Ministry effectiveness assessment. When's the last time you took a hard look at all the different things that you're doing? This is something that we do as a part of our strategic envisioning process, but you don't need an invitation from us to do it. You can do it yourself. Ministries have a shelf life of about 3 to 5 years. Not that you would cancel things after 3 to 5 years, but in terms of how effective their peak effectiveness kind of wears out after a handful of years. So if you've got ministries that haven't been touched for 5, 10, 15, 50 years in any significant way, measure their effectiveness. And we actually have podcasts on how to do this. So go to the Church Revitalization podcast, and there's an episode, I think, it would be smart if I had the actual episode number, AJ, but on how to analyze the effectiveness of ministries, just look through the list and you can find it. And I would give that one a listen. If you don't have a dashboard for measurement of success, it'd be a good time to do that. Develop a dashboard, or if you've not done a deep dive in your numbers lately, might be a good time to do that as well. So take the time to really look at the measures of discipleship success in your church and figure out where you have opportunities for growth. And emotional intelligence. This is a real opportunity. A crisis is for you to become more emotionally intelligent just in general, but thinking through where are the gaps in your character that you could really work on. And this is an opportunity to kind of sit back, reflect back, and go, how can I be a better leader and a more loving leader and a more emotionally intelligent leader moving forward? So these are just some options. All right, very brief bonus section. So how can you be ready in the interim? So we've talked through how you can get prepared if you have to close, but while you're not being closed, what are some things that you could work on? Precautions to take now. Number 1, disinfect the toys. When is the last time you disinfected the toys in your children's ministry? Like, for real?
Every Sunday after church? Is that not it?
No, I don't. I'm just saying. If it's been a while, maybe go ahead and do that. It's a good idea in general, but now's a good time. Hey, maybe suspend the whole meet and greet. Hey, turn to your neighbor, give him a hug and say hello.
Give him a sneeze.
People hate that anyway. So if you're looking for an opportunity to turn that thing off in your service, now's a great time. Elbows, fist bumps, maybe fist bump your neighbor. That'd be fine. But maybe don't shake hands. Set out some extra chairs, even if you don't need them. That way, as people want to spread out a little bit, so they're not having to sit right next to somebody, not a bad idea. It's always nice for people to have a little bit of elbow room. If you have pews, people kind of do this by default anyway, right? They kind of set their bulletin next to themselves as sort of the cue for please don't sit directly next to me. Are you saving that seat for somebody? No. Yes, I'm saving it for my personal space. Set out some extra chairs. Get sanitizer stations. You've seen these on walls in lots of places, and usually they're empty. And you're like, why have this if you're not going to fill it with anything? But you can buy these, get some sanitizer stations. Just make sure that any hand sanitizer you have has at least 60% alcohol content by volume. If you don't, then it doesn't work against coronavirus. Even then, it's alcohol-based hand sanitizers still are not nearly as effective as typical good hand washing, but it's at least something. So if you have hand sanitizer out, be sure it has at least 60% alcohol. And then just be vigilant for cleanliness. All the little things. Like my church, we've got hand pump for the coffee creamer. Think about that. I've never thought about that until today. I was thinking, man, every person is putting their hand on that thing. Your coffee urns are the same way, right? They've got those, a lot of the carafes are those sort of air pot things. So just think through those things, wipe them down, or, on the creamers, go to the individual creamers for a season. Just think of all the different ways you can keep things clean. Will it make a difference? To be honest, probably not. But people will notice that you care, and they'll appreciate that.
Yeah. Actually,
especially vigilant, I would say, for...
Two more here as well, because Adam just brought up, would you make any changes to communion? And so if you're passing a tray, and especially my church has little crackers that you can grab out of a little thing and grab your cup. So you might want to switch to you can buy the pre-made ones that have the styrofoam bread on top that you could eat. So that all you have to do is grab that thing and it's all self-contained. Or you could even, run people, if you don't want to pass the tray then that has those things, you could even make that available as they come in. Just have those in a basket. They can grab one of those out on the way in. Say, please don't snack until communion time, please. But you could, pre-hand those out. Offering could be done in a similar way. People could come up instead of passing a tray. They could, maybe run people through and drop off their offerings. So yeah, those are just great ways to minimize contact between people's hands. So
I'll be honest with you. I bet those those prepackaged communion things are going to sell out.
Maybe so.
So you might want to go ahead and just hop on that right now. If you think that that's an option for you, you can always prepackage your own too. You could have your communion prep folks wear gloves, and you could pre-portion things, put them in little bags or little containers. Even the little juice, you could get the little those little containers that have a lid, plastic containers. Pour a little bit of juice in those things and slap a lid on them. So you can prepackage your own, although that's a lot of work. So maybe just buy the prepackaged ones. And I would probably do that sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, and we appreciate that your care for your church, and that's why you decided to jump on today with us. So thanks very much. A couple of resources for you just to keep up on finance. Dr. Malphurs has a great book on church finance called Money Matters in Church. They wrote alongside Steve Stroop. So you can from Malphurs and Stroop on that. Also, as Scott mentioned, in emotional intelligence, Dr. Malphurs has a book, Developing Emotionally Mature Leaders. All these are available on Amazon. Scott also mentioned our Church Revitalization podcast. You can find that on Spotify, iTunes, and a variety of other podcast streaming services that you might prefer. So just do a search for Church Revitalization podcast. You'll find us there. If you're not on our mailing list, and you should be, and that's how you ended up here, but a lot of you were invited by other folks, then please go to malphursgroup.com and get on our mailing list there so that you can keep up with our weekly articles that also coincide with our weekly podcast.